In this video, I'll show you how to make sourdough English muffins with those wonderful nooks and crannies that soak up butter and jam perfectly. I'll show you two ways you can bake these, one using a skillet and an oven, and the other method using no oven at all. 300 grams of water goes into a mixing bowl. Follow that with 50 grams of active risen sourdough starter. I recommend feeding your starter about 4 to 6 hours before you need to use it. Then add to the bowl 10 grams of salt, and 10 grams of any sweetener that you like. I'm using honey, but you could easily use white or brown sugar and it'll turn out fine. Then just stir together all of your wet ingredients to dissolve the starter and the sweetener into the water. Then add 475 grams of white bread flour. This is the last ingredient you'll need. With all the ingredients considered, this makes a 65% hydration dough, which is relatively low, and it seems to be perfect for these English muffins. This recipe calls for hand kneading or kneading with a stand mixer, but I like to give everything a mix with a spoon just to get the dough to hold together like this, and then I move it over to my KitchenAid stand mixer. If you're kneading by hand, you'll just knead for about 8 to 10 minutes until the dough comes together. If you're using a stand mixer like me, just start on a lower speed until the dough comes together like this. Then kick the machine up into a medium speed and keep kneading for about 6 to 8 more minutes. Eventually the dough will come together and be smooth on the outside and you can stop kneading. Even if the dough looks kind of loose and not very well developed, you don't really need to keep kneading this too much longer. The gluten will develop overnight during the long bulk fermentation. So to prep for that, you can move this to a glass bowl or just keep it in the same mixing bowl, smoothing down the dough so it looks like this. Then simply cover it up with something relatively airtight. I'm using a kitchen towel and a plate. And let the dough rest and rise at room temperature overnight for about 8 to 10 hours. In the morning, my dough looked like this. It had doubled in size. It was nice and smooth and domed on the top, showing me that it had risen a lot overnight. And the dough was light, puffy, and airy, showing me that it was ready to shape. After the first rise, prepare your kitchen countertop with a little bit of bread flour. You want to have a non-stick surface to put the dough, then just plop that right on top of the bread flour. You can even flip it over to get flour on both sides of the dough, so it's nice and easy to work with. As long as the flour isn't really excessive, it should still be pretty easy to shape these into dough balls in a few minutes. Speaking of shaping, a lot of people like to flatten out their English muffin dough and then cut it with biscuit or cookie cutters, but I tend to waste too many dough scraps that way, so I like to divide the dough into 12 equally sized pieces. Each piece should weigh about 70 grams or so if you weigh them on a scale. And then using a little bit more bread flour on the counter, I take a piece of dough and then I stretch and fold it into a dough ball like this. Pretty much just grabbing an edge of the dough and pulling it towards the center, keeping the floured side on the outside and the sticky side meeting in the middle. Then I put the seam side back down on the counter and I give the ball a roll like this to smooth out the sides, and there's a perfect ball of dough. Follow the same stretch and fold and roll process to roll all of your dough into little balls like this. This is almost exactly the same as the process I used to shape my sourdough dinner rolls if you've seen that video from before. With your 12 dough balls shaped, it's time to move these onto a baking sheet lined with parchment paper to proof. So I like to take a regular cookie sheet or baking sheet, line it with parchment paper, and then sprinkle on some coarsely ground cornmeal. Some people prefer to use semolina flour or a cornmeal that's ground a little more finely, but use whatever you have on hand. Press each ball of dough down into the cornmeal on the parchment-lined baking sheet, making sure that it doesn't stick to the parchment. Feel free to add more cornmeal if you need to. Then just press down each ball of dough so they're a little bit flatter and start looking like English muffins. Since you're not flattening these with a rolling pin, it's good to flatten them by hand at this stage. Then sprinkle the top of each English muffin with a little bit more cornmeal. That's going to provide texture in the final product and another nonstick layer for while these are proofing, which is exactly what we're going to do now. Cover these up with a kitchen towel or some plastic wrap and let them rise at room temperature for about 2 to 3 hours until they're nice and puffy like this. Mine have almost doubled in size and I can see that there's considerable air inside of each English muffin. This final proof is really important for getting that nook and cranny texture. Now I'm going to show you how to cook this half of the English muffins using just your stovetop and this half using a skillet and the oven. Here's what to do for the stovetop only method. Put a well-seasoned cast iron skillet onto a medium-low heat. Lower is probably better than medium if you're worried that your pan is too hot. When you're cooking English muffins on the stovetop, the name of the game is low and slow. If the flame is too high, the outside of your English muffins will burn while the insides are still raw. So a very low to medium heat is what you're looking for here. Line up as many English muffins as you can in your cast iron pan without them touching, remembering that they're going to puff up a little bit in the pan, so leave a little bit of space in between each one. I fit 6 muffins into this pan, but honestly it was probably a little bit too crowded. Now you're going to start cooking for 8 minutes on the first side. The goal is to cook the muffin about halfway through and get a nice golden brown on the first side. After 1 minute of cooking, I like to test the muffins to make sure that the first side has sealed and that they're able to pull away from the pan. If you've got one like this that has stuck to the pan, just do your best to get it unstuck without ruining the English muffin. There's always that one muffin that doesn't want to cooperate, but if you're gentle with it, you can get it unstuck. Ideally, the underside of the English muffins will seal in the first minute or two of cooking, then you'll be able to slide them around the pan easily during the rest of the cooking time. After 8 minutes, you want to flip them all over. You're looking for a golden brown color on that first side, but if you don't see the exact color that you're looking for, that's fine. I'll show you how to fix that at the end of the cooking time once the muffins have cooked through in the center. Right now, press each muffin down so they're a little bit flatter. You don't want dome shapes like hamburger buns. You're looking for flat English muffins like this. Continue cooking them on this side for a full 8 minutes or until they have a nice brown color and you're pretty sure they're cooked all the way through. 190 degrees Fahrenheit with a probe thermometer is what you're looking for. Now to get a golden brown color on the first side, flip the muffins back over, turn the heat up to medium, and wait until you see that golden brown color that you're looking for. Then take the muffins out and move them onto a wire rack to cool. Now, if you want to run your oven, this method is a little bit easier and less finicky. Turn the oven on to 350 degrees Fahrenheit and put a cast iron skillet on the stove on medium heat. This can be more medium and not as low as the first method, because the goal with this method is to try to get the color that you want on the outside of the English muffins using the stovetop and the cast iron skillet, and then you'll move the English muffins to the oven where they'll finish cooking through the middle. So you still don't want to burn the English muffins on the stovetop, but you don't have to worry about keeping such a low temperature as with the other method. Cook these for about 3 to 4 minutes on the first side, then flip them over once you've got a golden brown exterior that you're happy with. Press them down to flatten, just like with the first method, because you don't want hamburger buns. Then continue cooking for another 3 to 4 minutes on the second side until you've got a golden brown color that you're looking for. I'm pretty happy with these, so I'm going to move them over to my baking sheet where I'm going to bake them on. Once they're spaced out on your cookie sheet or baking sheet, put them into your oven, which has been preheated for at least a half hour to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Let them bake for 10 to 15 minutes. You're just looking to bake them through to an internal temperature of about 190 degrees. You don't necessarily want any more browning on the outside, but if you get a little extra browning, that's completely fine. Even though one plate of these English muffins was inside of the oven and the other one was cooked completely on the stovetop, I think the exterior of these English muffins ended up looking really similar for both methods. So it's up to you which method you want to cook with. These muffins on the left were cooked using only the stovetop method, and this plate on the right was the ones that I baked with the stovetop and the oven combined. They say that you're supposed to split an English muffin open with a fork instead of a knife to preserve the nook and cranny appearance and texture of the inside of the English muffin. I'm really not sure if that's absolutely necessary or if it's just marketing, but I went ahead and did the fork split method anyway, and I can say that I was extremely pleased with how these turned out. They just have a bumpy, jagged texture on the inside, which is perfect for anything that you want to spread or slather on top. It completely makes sense why in the US these became a classic choice for a breakfast sandwich. These are sturdy enough to hold any kind of sandwich fillings that you add to the inside. They don't fall apart like a flaky buttermilk biscuit, although those are delicious. And the slightly sweet, complex flavor of these sourdough English muffins absolutely beats anything you can get at the store. I'm happy to say that both baking techniques seem to produce similar results with a great interior and a great flavor, so it's really up to you which baking technique you go with. The most important thing to keep in mind when making these sourdough English muffins is that they're delicious, and so are these sourdough bagels. So click the video on the screen to watch how I made those, and I will see you in the next video.